Hello everybody, welcome to Bare Basic Tech. Today we're going to be going over some basic data types that you guys will be using in Python. So to start off with, here's the breakdown of everything that we're going to be looking at today. Essentially, I'm going to go through your basics of numbers and strings, and then later on we go through tuples, lists, sets, dictionaries, which these four will kind of build off of what I discuss over with these two. So note that there are classes as well and objects that stem from that. I'm not going to be going over that in this video, but just bear with me here for today's instructions. So starting off with numbers. So this is basically used for your routine calculations that you're doing for day-to-day things within your program. So a couple examples I list here. You have integers. So these are simple, just plain old numbers, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 can be anything, right? But it's got to be a whole number, right? Can't be a decimal or anything like that for it to be considered an integer, right? Next, you have your floats, which are basically just decimal numbers. Nothing too crazy about that. And then you have complex numbers. So these are more for engineering calculations. Yeah, if you've never seen these before, I wouldn't worry about it too much. I've never used these really in my time programming, but these are just examples. So these are both two different ways you can write them, and then I will print them all out for you here to show you kind of what they all look like separately. So let's run it. You'll see here the integer comes out as 4, the float comes out as 3.32, the complex variable here 3 plus 4j, and then the other way of writing it, the same exact thing. So just so you can kind of see it written out, it's nothing too complicated here, but just understand what they are and the differences between what an integer is, what a float is, what a complex variable is, right? So moving on, going down to strings. So strings are pretty much used for holding any kind of text. Now this can include numbers as well, as I'll demonstrate here, but basically, sorry, I'm going to go ahead and comment this out so that we don't see this for the rest of the video. So basically, let's say we're trying to print the string, right? So our first command here, I'm going to run this to show you guys. It's just going to print a very basic hello world, right? Because as you can see here, it's in between the two quotations. That is what will determine that this is officially a string, right? Are these quotations. So let's go ahead and run that. You see hello world, right? So now, what happens if I delete the quotations though? Uh-oh. Yeah, so invalid syntax, right? Because we got rid of the quotations. So I'm going to go ahead and add them back in just so you can see. But then I also said, right, that you can print out numbers as well. So I have this 2 here. And now you're probably thinking, well, that won't work because it doesn't have quotations. Well, not exactly. It'll still work because it recognizes that it is a valid variable assignment, right? 2, it's an integer. Python is smart enough to say, oh, okay, that's just an integer on its own. I'm going to go ahead and be able to print that. So now if we go ahead and print variable 2 here, it'll give you 2, right? Likewise, you can also do this. Just put quotations around it, like I said. It'll do the same thing. See, 2. However, I'm going to go ahead and take it away again. The issue you'll run into is if you try and combine them. So if you try and mix two data types, right? So this, again, is a string. This is an integer. Let's try and print them together here in this statement, right, where we're doing string variable and variable 2, right? See, already my editor is telling me it's going to be an issue, so I'll just show you what happens though. Type error, must be string, not integer. So it's referring to variable 2 here because it's saying, hey man, like you're trying to print out a string with an integer. I don't know how to add those two together here for the sake of printing out the string. So what you can do are a couple things, right? One, you can change this to a string by yourself. And now look at that, it works. Hello world 2. Or you can reassign it by converting it to a string this way. So just str parentheses and then 2. Or you can even do, just type the variable in. Right, either way. Sorry, it's because I didn't get rid of that. Try it again. So hello world 2, see? So it'll still work, you just have to reassign it to actually fit as a string data type. So you're adding a string with a string. So again, this is just used for holding any type of text that you need. So now we get on to a couple of the more, not so much complicated ones, but they build off of the integers and the strings that I was just mentioning. So a tuple, we'll start with that. Essentially, these can store multiple data types similar to a list, which I'll go over later, but they can't be changed, right? So you can't really modify the size of the tuple or the variables inside of it. So just think of this, right, as essentially a container for variables, right? So here I give you an example where we have a couple different variables with different data types, right? So we have, as the first item, a variable that's a string, then an integer, then a float, and then another string. So let's go ahead and we can print this out. Just to show you guys again, I'm going to go up here. Comment that out for y'all. All right, so we print that. This is what the tuple is going to look like, right? So we can test 1, 2, 0.34, and z, just as it shows up here, right? Simple enough. Now, the issue here is, to keep in mind, you can't reassign any of these values here. So what's here is here to stay, and it's not going to change no matter what you do. So let's try that, right? So this would be normally what you would use to assign a different value for the 0th item in the tuple. So that in this case would be affecting this. So what this would do in theory, if you were attempting to change this value, is it would be changing it to not test. So already again, my editor is giving me grief about this because it's going to tell me basically, it's like, hey man, you can't change the tuple value. See, tuples don't support item assignment. So, but I'm going to say, no, let's just try it, see what happens. And as it said, tuple object does not support item assignment, right? So basically what it's just telling you is, hey man, you can't do that. This is a tuple. Tuples do not support item changes. Don't do that. So I'm going to go ahead and comment that back out again. What you can do with this though is you can still print out any of the items in here if you need them for whatever reason. So to access the item, you would just go ahead and use its index value, right? So in this case, again, indexes, right? How Python reads it is, this is item 0, this is item 1, this is item 2, and this is item 3. Anything outside of that, it's not going to understand. So if I put like 5, 6, 7 or something like that in here, it's going to give me an error. So let's just start off with 0, and it should return with test. So there we go, prints out test here, and then it prints out the whole tuple again at the bottom. I'll comment that so it's not confusing. So again, prints out test just fine. Now let's say I put in 1, it'll print out the 1th item, right? So right there you have 1. Let's go ahead and put 2 in, and it'll print out 2.34, 3, Z. Now let's try 4. Yep, and it's having an issue saying the tuple index is out of range because it doesn't have a 4th item, as you can see here, right? So you're probably wondering, why would I use this? The main reason is just to defend the variables from changes. So if you have variables that you know you don't want being modified throughout the program, you only want to be able to read them, so to speak, tuples are a good use for that, right? Because you can't possibly mess that up, so to speak, because tuples won't allow you to, right? If you ever try to edit or write over the variable's value inside the tuple, it will not let you, right? So you can only read. So this is information that you just know will not change and should not change for any reason whatsoever. So let's continue on down to lists. So lists are similar, but they can store multiple different types of variable or elements like a tuple can. However, this is a mutable data type, meaning that you can actually edit all of these values, right? And the difference here is, you'll notice how it's written, at least. The tuple is written with parentheses, lists are written with these brackets, right? So that is how you can identify as a programmer that is a list, right? Again, the variable name has nothing to do with what data type it is. You have to look at what the assignment is to really understand the data type, so just keep that in mind. So let's go ahead and try assigning a new value to a list item. So we're going to go ahead and try and reassign value 0 here, or item 0, excuse me, to a value of 3 instead of test. Let's try that. So look at that. So it changed test here to read as 3 now, right? Let's say I comment this back out and try and run it again. It should now say test again. See? Also, let's say you want to add to the list, right? You can add a new item. So let's say we want to add 4 here to go after Z. And look at that. Test 1, 2.34, Z, and 4, right? So just remember, you're using this command here called append to do that. That's what we'll add to your list. So again, this is probably what I personally use most, just because you can easily work with them. You can just change things very easily. They're easy to modify, easy to read and access, things like that. My opinion is these are very commonly used, probably more than tuples, but it depends how you program. I'll just go ahead and comment this back out before moving on. So now let's go over sets. So sets themselves are a data type that on their own are immutable. However, their variables are not. So that's kind of confusing, right? So what does that exactly mean? So in a summary, let's take this example here of a set variable that contains test 1, 2.34, and Z. Basically, a set, you can't change any of the items in here, right? So I can't change test, I can't change 1, I can't change this or this. However, I can add or I can remove elements from this data type. So you'll notice here to identify a set, you'll see this curly bracket on the outside of it, right? So this is different from lists, which are normal brackets, and tuples, which are parentheses. So note that that's how you identify the set variable, right? So now let's go ahead and print this example out and see what it gives us. So you'll see here it gives us the normal set that we have here, right? But you'll notice something kind of odd, right? You'll see that the order of the set isn't the same as it is here. And that's because that's another strange thing about sets, is that they are unordered, right? So you can't rely on it to give you the same exact order here as it will if you were to make this into a list or even a tuple. So let's show you, right? So if I keep running this and you see the output, you'll notice that time and time again, each element is in a different spot usually each time. So just note that when you're making your sets, is that you can't rely on them to have it in the same order. This is an unordered data type. So to prove to you also that you can't reassign variables, right? Because I said variables inside are not mutable here. Let's try it, right? So let's try to take set variable and change its 0 index item, which is test, so the 0 here, and let's change it to 4. So already my editor is telling me, yo, dude, you can't do this. That ain't gonna work because it's a set. But I'm gonna say, let's go ahead and do it anyway. Now, see here, it says, yep, you can't do that. I told you, and it's right. So that's a set. Sets, you can't alter the elements inside. Okay, so just remember that. You can't edit anything that's currently there. However, you can remove or even add values to a given set. So let's go ahead and try removing one. So let's go ahead and just say I want to get rid of test, right? So you write here, set variable, use .remove, and then inside the parentheses, test, or whichever other item you want to delete. And let's see what it outputs. So look, see it says 1, 2.34, and Z. Notice how test disappears. Let's try getting rid of Z and see what it does. Same thing, right? See how Z is now not here. This also works with 1 and the 2.34 value if you want to try it, right? But essentially, what I'm showing here is you can remove items and, like I said earlier, change the size of the set. Likewise, you can also add things. So let's go ahead and try and add an element called hello. So look, see now you'll still have 1, 2.34, test, z, and now hello. And again, it'll be randomly ordered in here. So you may add it, right? But you don't know where it's going to go. So one more thing I want to show you guys about sets is that essentially, why would I use this, right? What's the advantage to a set over the other things? One of the advantages here is that it automatically gets rid of any duplicates, right? So let's say we have a list, right? And it'll be made up of several 1s, a couple 2s, a 3, and a 7. But let's say for the problem set I'm trying to work through, I need to somehow make sure that this is all going to be made of unique values, right? So one way of doing that is by converting your list into a set. So this command here will do that for us. So essentially you would just write set and then in parentheses write your list, which is called duplicate list. And then we're going to give it a new variable name and call it set list, right? So let's show you what duplicate list looks like first. So again, this is what it looks like before becoming a set. Now let's show you what it looks like as a set. And see here how we go from a data type or data variable that is brackets to one that has curly brackets, right? And that's because this is a list and this is a set. So right off the bat, we also notice that this is significantly shorter in size than our list, right? And this is because, as I mentioned, it only stores unique values. So this 1 that shows up 3 different times, the set is like, nope, we don't need these. Just give me 1 and it'll throw it in here. Same with the 2s, where it'll only give us 1, 2, and then the 3 and the 7 are already unique, so it puts them in here once. And then once all that's done, it'll just still randomly order them, right? But then you're saying, all right, well, that's great, but what if I need them in a list and I still need to access and use the different variables in here? Well, that's too easy. All you need to do is just convert it back to a list by using the list command, put set list in there, and we'll just reassign it back to being called its original variable name. And then we'll show you what that looks like as output. So again, we have the original duplicate list. We have it broken down by the set, and then we convert it back to a list so it's usable again. So that's just one purpose of it. I personally don't use these a whole lot, but it is definitely a way to go about getting unique variables, or if you just want something that can hold data and you don't necessarily, have the same uses as the list or the tuple for it. But so moving on down, I just want to show you guys one more time the difference between those 3 that we just covered. The tuple, the list, and the set, right? Because they all sound somewhat similar yet different at the same time, right? So let's just review the difference here. So we'll print them all out. So we got the tuple first, which is made with parentheses. This is your most rigid container, right? So this data type will not be able to be changed whatsoever, right? You can't change any of the items in there at all. You can't change the length of this at all, right? So just think of it as something that will never change for any reason throughout the execution of your program. Going down to lists, this is made with the brackets, the normal brackets, right? So this can hold items just like anything else, and it can also easily be modified or added, or you can add or remove items from this, changing the length however you want to. It's up to you. But this is essentially the most easy to alter container data type out of the 3 that we've covered. Just remember that. And then finally we get down to the set, which is made with the curly brackets, right? So this one is like the in-between of the tuple and the list, where essentially you can't modify anything in here, like any of these items that already exist, similar to the tuple. However, you can add or remove items in the set, sort of like a list, right? We're going to go with our final data type here, known as the dictionary, right? So think of this similarly to a list, right? The big difference here is when we're using lists to identify an object, we identify it with the index value, right? So again, here, this is how we identify test, right? List variable brackets 0 would be test. Here, if we wanted to identify money, we look at item, right? So you build a dictionary by using curly brackets to surround everything in it, and then you write what's called a key, which in this first item is item. You use a colon to separate the key from what's called the key's value. So what this essentially means, right, is that this key is tied to this value. So when we go ahead and we print it down here, so out of dictionary variable, I want to see the value that's associated with item. Now this is going to output money. So let's go ahead and run that. So see, we run it with item as the key. It gives you the output, which is money. Let's go ahead and run the next one, which will be using the key quantity. This will give you an output of 100 because 100 is the value identified with quantity. Like I said, 100. Continue down. So the final one, extra items, it's going to give you here this list, the whole list. Even though it's multiple items in the list, you still just get the whole list, right? So you're going to get wallet and hat. There you go. So again, just remember here, when you're building these, you have a curly bracket, you have a key, you have a colon, which separates the key from the value, and then if you want to add more items to your dictionary, you add a comma, and then normally it's good practice to just add a new line so it's easier to read, right? So then you have a new key, a colon, a value, a comma, so on and so forth. And then once you're done, you just end it with a curly bracket, right? If I wanted to, I could absolutely write it like this, where you keep it all on one line, just to show you guys how that's possible. It'll still do the same thing, no difference, right? However, it's just a little more readable, and it's good practice just to give everything its own line so that you can easily see, okay, these are all my keys here, and then these are all my values. So that's all I have, guys. Thanks a lot. I got my code that I'm going to post up on GitHub for you guys and put it down in the description if you want to see this for your own personal use. But thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.